Welcome to Food for Thought, the place to explore, celebrate, and manifest a life motivated and defined by unconditional compassion and optimal wellness. Today's episode is Fasting and Feasting and the 12 Days of Christmas. Hi everyone, my name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. You can find me at joyfulvegan.com. If you're interested in traveling with me on some pretty awesome vegan trips, you can go to joyfulvegantrips.com to see what we've got in store. I have said a number of times that this podcast is possible because of the support of listeners like you. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So if you have not sponsored this podcast yet, if you have not become a podcast sponsor, supporter, patron, whatever you want to call it, please do so now. It is a wonderful time to do so. You can do so by going to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thank you so much in advance for doing so. I'm excited to also announce I've got some new cooking classes already scheduled for 2022, and gift cards are available if you'd like to give someone the gift of one of the online cooking classes I teach. They're super fun. They're hopefully super valuable. That's what I keep hearing from people who attend. Inspiring, and just I really put a lot of thought into what themes we do and which recipes I pick, because I want to give you the most value for the class. So you can check out the menus. We've got homemade, vegan, and zero waste coming up in January. I'm making this really amazing pastry crust, which is going to be a really fantastic basic pastry crust for you, whether you're making a savory pie or a sweet pie. We're doing homemade seitan, homemade oat milk, and we're making homemade tortilla chips. So that's just January. We've got a Valentine's Day dinner for February, and we've got a St. Patrick's Day feast for March. So check it out. It's so funny. The reason I said I was going to talk about this idea of the sponsorships, the patronage, if you will, is I've been doing this podcast now for almost 16 years. And the reason I'm able to do it is because of listener supporters. Like, literally, you make it possible. This is not just a spiel, right? You literally make it possible. And I mean, there was a time where I'm thinking back on, I had a Compassionate Cooks membership. I don't know if some of you remember that. So my LLC, I'm an LLC officially. And that for years has been Compassionate Cooks. That was kind of the original name of my business. And now I just use that as the LLC name, but otherwise it's just me. It's my name, because that's really what this is about. It's just me running all of this. And yet I had a Compassionate Cooks Club membership. I used PayPal at one point. We had subscriptions. We had different things. And now Patreon has been the latest medium through which you can support the podcast. And I cannot emphasize enough. Someone said to me recently, she said, "How do you do so much? Like, you seem to do so much. How do you do it?" And I think one of the things she was asking was, how do I manage my time, right? But the answer to that question really is because I devoted my life to this, and I spend literally 8 to 10 hours a day just writing, crafting, thinking, creating content for listeners, for readers, for anybody I think would be interested in, kind of my way of thinking about what it means to live compassionately and healthfully. And that's how I spend my time. And I'm a bit rigid about it. Like, I could go and play and read and just, I don't know, kick back. And I don't. Like, all of my time is spent doing this work. And I'll be honest, sometimes it feels like it's just going out into the void, because I look at the way things are now with social media, and it can be disconcerting, and it can be hard, and it can be stressful. One feels a lot of pressure because you look at all of the content that's being created and people just putting stuff out there every single second, every single day, and high quality content, right? Good content. And you feel like you get lost in the shuffle, and you feel like if you're not putting out, posts every day, or free recipes, or free this, or selling something online, on social media, then you're just going to kind of lose relevance. And I'll be honest, which I don't think I've said that to you before here on this podcast, but sometimes I feel that way. And so I'm very grateful that you are here supporting this podcast. You are my main means of support. When I say main, I mean the only other place I get support is when my books sell. And if you think for a second that an author could live on their book royalties, especially books that have been out for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you just don't know how it works. And the percentage that an author gets of the royalties is a pittance. So the publishers do really well, but the authors, books are a labor of love unless you are a best-selling author. And that's great. I would love to be a best-selling author. I would love to be able to make money on my books, but that's just not the case. And so, so I have all these little things. I've got these funnels. I've got the podcast supporters. I've got the cooking classes. I've got the trips that we do, and all of them kind of add up to me being able to do this work full time. But I'll be honest, it feels hard lately. And some of it is my own decisions about how I've decided to run my business. And one of the things that's really challenging for me is to have a team. Like, I don't want to spend my time managing people, and I've made that decision. And so I do most of this myself. And so what that means is I do a lot, but I spend time on things that really an assistant would be able to spend a lot more time on. I have some help, but nothing like I need to properly grow. And that's a decision I've made. And that's what it is. I've also made the decision to not, sell things. I mean, especially things that I don't care about, and just sell things. And so I was talking to a friend the other day, and she called me an influencer. And I said, please do not call me an influencer, because I like to think that I influence people, but that's not what it means anymore. Like, I do think that, like, in the old school definition of that term, I have been an influencer. I have influenced people in their thinking about animals and their thinking about food and veganism, and that is true, and I'm really grateful for that. I wouldn't keep doing this work if I didn't think I had anything left to say. But today, that's not what it means. It basically means someone who's who dedicates their time to selling things to their audience, and I'm not that, and I don't want to become that. But I don't know that I can keep spending 8 to 10 hours a day without being able to do this work, sustainably. So what I'm saying is, if you are remotely interested in my continuing this work and teaching the classes and doing this podcast and writing my, blog posts and writing these social media posts and creating recipes and writing editorials, I encourage you to become a supporter. I mean, if you support the podcast for $5 a month, I've got to think that that's possible, or $10 a month, or, getting a gift card for one of the cooking classes. So I'm saying this to you from the bottom of my heart, and I'm being completely honest, because I think people, from the outside just look at what appears to be just a, just constantly smooth, successful machine. And I appreciate that people think that. And I think I do run a pretty tight ship here in terms of how much I do and how much I'm able to produce. And all I'm saying is, if you want it to continue, I appreciate your support. So thank you for listening to that rant. I thought I would share with you, now that we're here at the holidays, and some of the more popular episodes from the last couple years have been the episodes I've done on what it means to live a meaningful life. And I love that we're pivoting to that. I mean, obviously, my work is all about the animals and compassion and wellness and food and zero waste and sustainability. My work has always encompassed all of these things. And through all of them has been kind of how I see the world and how I live my life. And I do make an effort to live as thoughtfully and consciously, obviously, and compassionately as possible. And so it's meant a lot that that thread running through my work has resonated with a lot of you. So here we are at the holidays. Specifically for me, this is my 51st Christmas. So I've been around now for 51 Christmases, and the questions I ask myself at this time of year, and for as long as I've had a say in how I want to celebrate this winter holiday, are what does this time of year mean to me, and how do I want to mark it? And it comes around every year, right? So we have an opportunity every year to reinvent, reinvigorate its significance to us. And it's one of the things I love about, well, this time of year, because I've talked in the past how I do see this, about how I do see this as a threshold, stepping in from the end of the year to the new year. And it's what I love about just the holidays and rituals like this. Rituals give us something to hold on to. They connect us with the past, and they kind of force us to pay attention to the to the present. You can pay attention to the president too. But to really pay attention, to look down at your feet and say, why am I doing this? And what do I want from this time? And how do I want to feel? And what do I want to give? And who do I want to be? And so here we are, and we were supposed to be in Botswana and South Africa right now, as I record this, but our trip was postponed again because of COVID, because of the reaction to the Omicron variant. I wouldn't even just say it was because of the variant, it was because of the reaction to it, and the countries that shut down their borders to these African countries, which was really unfortunate because that Omicron's everywhere, and it really felt like these poor countries were penalized. And I can't help but say that, being African countries, I feel like it wouldn't have happened if these were European countries. If a European scientist, if a European country had discovered the variant, I don't think they would have shut down the borders. Let's just put it that way. So all that's to say, same result is we had to postpone our trip because people just wouldn't be able to come and go from South Africa. And there were too many unknowns. We just wanted to make sure our travelers were going to be safe and that we had the right information to run a trip that was safe and amazing, because that's what we do. So we've pushed it to December 2022. I believe we have one spot in that trip, only because someone had already pulled out way before the Omicron thing, just because they had a family emergency. And so we do have one spot left for that. Anyway, all that's to say is we were supposed to be in South Africa, but we're not. And that's here we are. It's all fine. It's all good. We're alive and we're well, and I'm grateful for that. So we are spending Christmas now here at home, and I love this time of year. I was already going to decorate the house because our cat sitter, our neighbor, was going to be staying with the cats at the house for 3 weeks, and I wanted to make sure she experienced the festivities and the lights and the magic of Christmas decorations because I really go all out as far as just at least putting up little white lights and mantelpiece garlands and little Christmas trees. We have little Christmas trees I've been putting up every year. So I was going to do that anyway, but here we are now experiencing the fullness of it. And while we're not going away for 3 weeks, David and I are going away for 4 nights to another county. This will be our 35th county in California. So for those just listening, David and I have made a commitment, or a quest at least, to sleep in all the counties of California. And there are 58 counties, and we have now slept in, this will be our 35th. So we're going up to Siskiyou County and going to have a magical time there. And we decided on 4 nights, partly because of the topic of this episode, because of what I wanted to do on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. So you have heard me talk a lot about how I love to entertain. I am now fully settled into that characterization of myself, that I love bringing people together. I love creating magic. I love treating people. I love entertaining. I love hosting people. And it is just really one of my favorite things to do. And I'm pretty good at it. And I attribute that to my mom too, because she just absolutely hosted all the time. And it was one of those things when I was reframing my memory of my mom, or my thoughts about my mom, even before she died, right? But for a long time, sometimes when you have conflicts with people, especially your parents, you want to just disown any way that you might be similar. And I did that for a long time. And as I started looking at, well, actually, what things do I have from her that I can really appreciate and embrace? And that was a big one, is that she entertained all the time and loved hosting people and love hosting parties and dinners. So, and I do love having themes. I'm a bit of a dork that way. Like, I really love creating themes, and especially at the holidays. I've done that over the years. I mean, name a holiday. I've just created themes for it. I mean, we did like, a British Christmas many years ago. This is kind of, it seems silly, but like, we did a Christmas cake and we had crackers, like, which is not how we normally typically celebrate Christmas in the US. We don't have Christmas crackers and we don't have Christmas cake. So we did all that. We had crowns and it was actually super fun. And a lot of the same people who came to that dinner, which would have been now 11 years ago, I think, will be coming to our Christmas this year. So I started thinking about, okay, what do I want to do this year? And I'm always interested in history. So I've been kind of revisiting the history of Christmas and revisiting kind of like what does this holiday mean to me? And so I've kind of looked back on some historical significance of the holiday. And I started really focusing on, kind of the Saturnalia, the Roman Saturnalia, which, Christmas for a very long time was about partying. Like it was just about revelry and celebration and food and drink, basically an excuse to get drunk, just an excuse to party, an excuse to eat, an excuse to just dance and music and all of it, an excuse to party. For a very long time, it has been that. And then, of course, things have changed over the years, and becoming part of the Christian calendar, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not going to get into the history of Christmas. It's not my expertise. I mean, obviously, I have some knowledge of it and interest in it, but that's not what this episode is about. It's about me reflecting on what this holiday is and how I want to celebrate it, and how do I want to make it meaningful. So I started thinking about Saturnalia and kind of partying in the Middle Ages, and I started thinking about and kind of looking into like, okay, how did they celebrate in the Middle Ages? How did the Tudors celebrate? How did Renaissance, et cetera, right? And I started, remembering that and it is, the Christmas day is all about partying. Well, prior to Christmas, prior to December 25th, it was about fasting. And it was about prayer and contemplation and kind of abstinence of, abstaining from certain things, like Lent prior to Easter. And I'm saying this as someone who was raised Catholic. I'm not a practicing Catholic. I'm not a practicing Christian, but this is part of my upbringing. And I celebrated. I practiced Lent when I was growing up. I went to Catholic school. I was a good little Catholic. And Lent is a period of 40 days before Easter, which is one of the main feast days on the Christian calendar, where you would give something up. And I loved it when I was little. I loved the idea of giving something up. I loved the idea of self-discipline. I loved the idea of kind of picking something that I could give up for that 40-day period. Well, prior to Christmas, there is something called Advent. And again, completely setting aside any religious aspect. And this is not to diss anybody who does celebrate the religious aspect who's listening. It's just not my story and it's not my lens, but putting that as, and so for those who are listening, just so that you have an understanding of it, Advent would have been a time prior to Christmas where you would have also had some form of fasting, again, prayer, and it was less time. Lent is 40 days before Easter, and Advent is essentially 4 weeks, 4 Sundays prior to Christmas. And so I started kind of making these connections and kind of thinking about this. And when I was growing up in the Catholic Church, Advent, like the extent to which we practiced, celebrated, however you want to put it, Advent, was that we had an Advent calendar, and which is kind of new. It does not go back the hundreds and hundreds of years. It goes back to like the 19th century, and they've become quite commercialized now. And it's not to say they weren't commercialized when I was young, but I would say in the last 50 years, 70 years, they've become even more commercialized, where you can get like a Simpsons Advent calendar or like Seinfeld Advent calendar. You can get an Advent calendar where you get chocolate every day, right? But when I was growing up, the Advent calendar, which, again, to be honest, was probably also commercialized. We're buying a calendar. But you basically open a window every day in the month leading up to Christmas, And every day that window just revealed a different part of the story that led up to Christmas Day, right? So led up to the birth of Jesus Christ. So that was Advent. And I loved just, again, if it's not clear, that I love ritual, I love stories, I love narratives. And so I would love like opening up those little windows. I loved Christmas when I was little. I mean, what kid didn't? But I just loved like opening a window and seeing like the donkey. Like, of course, I loved seeing the donkey, the little donkey that Mary rode, going to find an inn to stay. Like all of this, like these stories, like I just loved all of these stories, the dove of peace and all of this, right? So that was like Advent to me when I was growing up, and it was meaningful to that extent, but we didn't fast. It wasn't like Lent. We didn't have to give something up the way we did during Lent. Like that was a memory I have. But as I started thinking about this, if Christmas Day is all about celebration and feasting and revelry, well, giving something up prior to that makes a lot of sense, right? It's like you're actually spending time to kind of abstain from something and kind of give something up or sacrifice yourself or suffer a little bit, so that by the time Christmas Day came, you have like a really good reason to feast, because you haven't been prior to this. And so I was just, this is on my mind. And then we had some dinner with some friends recently, and we were talking about, how, what to do to make this Christmas meaningful and magical, and, seize the day and pivot and all of that. Right. And so we were talking, and she was also kind of feeling it too. My friend who I was talking to has just been going through a lot and dealing with a lot, and and we've all been dealing with a lot just overall because of COVID, and then add personal things on top of it, and it can be a really trying time. And so she was also like, yeah, I really want to make this a really special Christmas. And she and her husband have family coming on Christmas Day. And so we said, what about Christmas Eve? Like, let's make Christmas Eve just like super special. And we started talking about what Christmas Eve was to us when we were growing up. And Christmas Eve when I was growing up was all about like our neighbors and friends. My mother, just like the consummate socialite, she would just drag us around, and I hated it for years, and drag us around to different friends, and they were her friends' houses, and luckily they had kids as well, so we would play with the kids and get into all sorts of trouble and mischief. But we would go to different friends' houses and have food, and the adults would have drink, and we would bring presents, and that was our Christmas Eve. Like our Christmas Eve was not family. Our Christmas Eve was friends and neighbors. And so I was like, yeah, like let's do something really special. And it's not that like I haven't hosted Christmas and Christmas Eve before. I do it every year we're home. But I was like, yes, let's just make this super, super special. And so we decided we were having Christmas Eve dinner. I was going to host, surprise, surprise, and we were going to make it really special. And then I started thinking about kind of this whole idea of like revelry and Tudor Christmas and Advent beforehand and abstinence. And I started thinking about, what about having a Tudor themed Christmas, right? So Tudor, by the way, like Tudor, like during Henry VIII. And I mean, of all of my affinity for English history, by the way, for what it's worth, and this might be worth absolutely nothing, I am not a specialist in like the Tudors. They're my least, I'm least interested in like the Tudors than I am in like a lot of the medieval kings and like medieval history. I just find it more interesting than the two, like, because Henry VIII was just like a freaking monomaniacal crazy man who he just never appealed to me. so I haven't watched the Tudors and all of that, but sure, fine. So my point is that I hadn't done a Tudor themed Christmas ever, and I thought, let's do Tudor. Like that would be super fun. I asked a few more friends, and so now 9 of us are having Christmas Eve dinner together. So we'll just call it Christmas dinner for all intents and purposes. So then I started thinking about, okay, well, if you've got this celebration on Christmas Day, you've got Advent prior to Christmas Day during the Middle Ages and Tudor times was actually the first day, right, of the 12 days of Christmas. And I was thinking like, oh, God, I love the idea. I've always loved the idea of the 12 days of Christmas. And we did not, in our family, and I think different religions still today would celebrate the 12 days of Christmas, which start on December 25th and ends on January 6th on essentially it's called the Epiphany. It's also called King's Day, Three Kings Day. It's when the three kings brought gifts to the baby, right? So we didn't celebrate that. For us, it was Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and that was it. Like, that was it. And I started thinking, like, and I'm not someone who gets depressed around Christmas. I know there are a lot of people who do. So I say this with, the hope that perhaps there's some meaning you can take this in excitement, enthusiasm. But I mean, just full disclosure, when I say that, like, the 25th happens and then it's like downhill from there, I don't mean it literally in the sense of, like, I have experienced depression, but I understand that I understand how people can feel deflated afterwards, right? Especially since there's so much expectation, and we're guilty of that. We're all guilty of creating all these expectations for what the holidays will mean for us, and that means New Year's Eve as well. I think, again, we just kind of have all these hopes and expectations, and I think personally need to keep them in check. We're responsible for that ourselves. But what I'm saying here is that, if you're kind of a typical like me, you rev up, you have like, let's pretend we have parties, because with COVID, everything has changed. But right, you have the holiday season, people have parties, you're going to parties, there's drinks, you're festive, there's this and that. And it's all ramping up to December 25th. And December 25th happens in, kind of by the middle of the afternoon, you're like, okay, great. Well, like, all right, now we're going to go watch the game and we're done. And that's over. And unless you celebrate Boxing Day on the 26th, which, to be honest, is also just like, let's loaf on the couch and watch Christmas movies, then really the 25th is the end of this season. And then you kind of have some days and you're feeling like this no man's land between Christmas Day and then New Year's Eve. And then there's another bit of expectation and hope and disappointment. So we have this kind of like, woo, and then like, just everything's downhill from there. And I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. So for me, started thinking, like, I love the idea that Christmas Day is the beginning and not the end of a season's celebration and contemplation and meaning. And so that's what I'm implementing this year, very consciously. And so if we're going to have this feast on Christmas Eve, and I thought, well, what does that mean for me leading up to Christmas Day, leading up to Christmas Eve, leading up to this feast, leading up to this revelry? And I thought, well, I love the idea that I'm taking time prior to that day to be contemplative, but also to abstain from something or some things that would make the feast even more special, even more meaningful, right? So it's one thing to like feast after you've been feasting every day because you're in the holidays and you're in the parties or you're baking, right? So that's one thing to like feast after feasting. But what about feasting after abstaining? And I thought, that's an element of, again, kind of my upbringing or or a tradition that I don't necessarily celebrate for any religious reason, but something meaningful from that I can take and implement in my own life. And I thought, I like this idea a lot. I really love the idea of I love self-discipline. I love the idea of challenging myself. Maybe that's why I created the book called The 30-Day Vegan Challenge, because I love the idea that we take some time and we take a time period or, focus on one thing that we say, I can do this for 30 days or I can do this for 40 days in the case of Lent, right? And it just brought me back to kind of how excited I was when I did that when I was young regarding Lent. And so I thought, I could do this. Like, I really like the idea that I'm going to pick something or some things to abstain from prior to Christmas Day. And so here I am in the middle of it, actually, and I've chosen some things, and they are sugar and bread and nuts. Now, why did I choose these things? I don't have to get into great detail about that, but I chose things that would be, they're not like so difficult. It's not like I'm like white knuckling it and like, I really want sugar. I eat sugar every day. I really want sugar. But they were enough of things that like I'm practicing self-discipline by not having them. And I'm like testing recipes throughout this period that include sugar. And so I'm not eating it. I mean, I'm testing I want to test it because I want to make sure they taste good, but like I'm not eating them. And same thing with nuts. Like none of these things I have every day and like I can't live without, but they're enough that like in not having them, I am recognizing patterns and behaviors where I'd go, oh, I really want to just like grab those chocolate chips that are sitting in my cupboard and just like, pour a few into my hand and eat them. Like that's something I would do pretty regularly, but I didn't really kind of see it as a pattern or a habit. And so giving something up, right? And this is what I talk about with the 30-day vegan challenge. When you stop something for a period of time, you're actually more inclined to see patterns in your behavior that you wouldn't have thought were even habits. And so you're forced to kind of pivot when you are looking at them full on because you're choosing not to partake in something. So that's exactly what I'm experiencing. And same with bread. Like I'm not a big bread person. My husband is, but I'm not. But enough that like, yeah, these are things that like not having them during this time period is allowing for self-discipline and creating some self-reflection and awareness as well. Like I didn't give up tea. I'm not giving up tea. I'm not giving up wine. because it is Christmas time and we do enjoy our wine and we are going to be going away, right? Crazy like that. But anyway, you get the idea. So pick what you want if you do something like this. But the idea is that it really does feel meaningful, and it does. Like I didn't give up coffee either because I don't drink coffee. So I'm not picking things that like I don't actually ever have. I'm picking things that are part of my life and that requires discipline to not have them, but not so crazy that it's about complete suffering. But some of this is about suffering as well, and that's okay too. Anyway, the point is, I asked David, and told him kind of my thinking about all of this and shared all of this with him. And I asked if he would join me. And poor David, he always gets roped into my schemes, and he agreed. And I was quite pleased. He agreed. And so he is abstaining from bread, which is a big deal for David. It's a big deal for David, and beer and aioli. So you've heard me talk about aioli. Now, David eating aioli usually is like using bread as the medium for the aioli. So it's not like David eats aioli a lot if he's not having bread, but definitely one of the things he would snack on, like when he would get peckish and just snack kind of unconsciously, would be bread with aioli. So having that third thing as aioli, it's kind of moot in the sense that he doesn't really eat aioli if he doesn't have bread, but it's okay. He's got his three things, and that's what he chose, and that's what he's doing. And so again, same thing. Like it's not like he drinks beer every single day, but in not having it, it's requiring self-discipline, and it's also very reflective. And so like that was something that's kind of formed out of, what does this holiday mean to me? How can I make it special? And so if we're going to have a feast, I want to have some abstinence beforehand. And so here we are. And so there's the abstinence. And as far as the feast, I have just gone to town, and I have like all manner of ideas about the menu and about what to do on this Christmas Eve. And I can't say too much because I do know some friends who are coming do listen to the podcast, so I'm not going to say too much. So I'm going to keep some things close to my chest. But as far as the food, because they know about this, I did start working on the menu, and it's been super fun. And to be clear, like a Tudor menu would be absolutely disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. Because, okay, well, let's talk about a Tudor menu at a court, right? It wouldn't be just like the peasants. I mean, the peasants would definitely be eating, meat more than probably the only meat they would have all year, to be honest, or at least, a whole goose or whatever it was, as opposed to just like, some scraps. But even at Christmas time, and, let's face it, when we're talking about Tudor England, like 90% of the population, they were serfs and they were peasants, and they were living, they were working on these manor estates where the manor house had all the wealth and the peasants had nothing. But at Christmas time, they would be invited to the manor house. And even though they would still get the scraps, I shouldn't say they get the scraps, they still got food that was inferior to the food that the upper classes would get. So they would be invited to the court. And so at the court dinners, or, obviously the same thing with, like, you were like King Henry's court, but at the court, like, it was all about displaying your wealth. It was all about displaying just absolute, like, luxury, just unleashed. And so when it came to the food, it was about showing off spices and sugars, like all these things that were very expensive, very hard to come by, and certainly a lot of animal meat. So am I being, 100% accurate in terms of what I'm serving? No, because I'm not going to serve animal meat, but I am kind of using them as inspiration for kind of what I'm coming up with. And so when I look at the menu for a Tudor menu, they loved pies. The Tudors loved their pies. And when I talk about pies, it's both savory pies and sweet pies. And I should say, the Tudors didn't make a huge distinction between savory and sweet. So you would have pies, again, very heavy meat pies with sweet, dried fruit inside and sweet spices inside. So you didn't have this total delineation. So when I thought, okay, well, what's my inspiration? Like, how can I riff off of that? Now, certainly I can do meaty things like using plant-based meats and making my seitan and that kind of thing. And I'll come back to that. But aside from that, I thought, well, what are some recipes that I love, or recipes that I have, or cuisines that I love that are conducive to kind of sweet and spicy, right? Or sweet and savory. And I just started thinking about North African cuisine, Moroccan cuisine, and Indian cuisine, where a lot of the recipes I know and love have this combination, especially Moroccan cuisine and North African cuisine. You've got this combination of sweet cinnamon, right, and cardamom, that kind of thing would be in a savory dish, along with, hot spicy chilies, and also, so you got the sweet from this, even raisins, right? And so you've got sweet and you've got savory. And so I have come up with a couple pies, and I've already started making some test versions. And if you are interested, by the way, this pastry crust that I'm using to make my pies, it's so easy and amazing, and it is one of the recipes I'm teaching in the homemade class in January, and it's going to be super fun. So I'm going to show you what one of the pies is, but I'm not showing you the whole filling because I can't do everything. This class is all homemade things, but what I am going to show you is the pastry crust. So you'll see me make it and add the filling, and you'll see this gorgeous pie. You can go to my Instagram account right now and see it, because I've been posting the recipes I've been testing. And the recipe I tested is like a chana masala. So chana being chickpeas, masala being mixed spices. And so when chana masala is like chickpeas, and you've got cloves and allspice and some cinnamon, and then I added some chili powder, and then I added some raisins to it, and it's absolutely delicious. So that's an example of me kind of riffing off of okay, how do you have a vegan Tudor menu, right? So that's kind of how I'm doing it. And we're also I'm going to be doing a couple pies. One of them is going to be a little more on the meaty side. One of them is going to be more kind of whole vegetables. I'll keep you posted, but this is what I'm thinking. And I've already posted this to my friends. I've already started a Google Doc. I've shared it with them. And I'm like, let me know if you want to make any mince pies, because mince pies would be a thing. Now, mince pies in Tudor time would have actually included animal meat. Today, mince pies in the UK, they're completely just sweet pies. The mince is all like dried fruit, raisins, nuts, that kind of thing. Today's mince pies are actually 100%, for the most part, I would say. Let's say ideally vegetarian or vegan, because the fillings are fruit, but often they have a binding, which would be lard, which would be animal fat. But you can make your own mince very easily and deliciously. And there is mince that you can buy commercially that is vegan. So mince pies are going to be on the menu as well. And as I mentioned, the pies that I'm making, and I'm going to really decorate them beautifully too. That's the other thing I'm going to be showing you in that class, is making these beautiful pastry decorations. So that's going to be super fun. I'm really excited about it. We're going to have wassail, which is basically mulled wine, spiced wine, warmed wine. And one of the guests is bringing homemade bread. And sugar work, I mentioned, is a big part of a Tudor Christmas celebration because it was all about showing off this very expensive element, ingredient, sugar. And so I'm going to be doing some fun things with sugar, and I'm still working on what those are, but I've got some things up my sleeve. Now, I'm not being 100% completely rigid about the rules. I can make the rules. They're my rules. I am probably going to make a bûche de Noël, which they would not have had at a Tudor Christmas, but they would have had highly decorated desserts. Now, since I'm not going to be making a cake where peacocks are flying out, which is what they would have done, or, whatever. Okay, maybe peacocks would be flying out, but you get the idea. They had these very elaborate desserts and cakes and that kind of thing. And they did involve all manner of animals. I'm not doing that. See if I could recruit Charlie and Michiko, maybe I'll do something with them, but we're not going to eat them. And so the point is, it's about highly decorated desserts. In fact, the banquet part of a Christmas celebration would have just been the dessert. So that's when you think of a banquet today, you probably think of mostly the dinner part, but actually banquet would refer to just the dessert, and it would have been incredibly elaborate. So I'm working on some really fun things to create some nicely decorated desserts, and a bûche de Noël is just perfect for that. So if you don't know what a bûche de Noël is, you can just look it up. It's basically a Yule log. And so I like it because that is something like a Yule log, an actual Yule log would have been something that was significant during this time and in the Middle Ages. And so that is actually accurate in that sense. A bûche de Noël, as we know it, really wouldn't have come about until the 19th century, early 1800s. And but honestly, this is still it's about the inspiration. So got lots of things up my sleeve, and I'm super excited. And this day, now, even though we're doing this on the 24th, because we can't do it on the 25th together because we have all different plans, but this day, our Christmas revels, it's about revelry, and it's about celebration, and it's about games and songs and music and food and drink and people. And that's what this is. We are going to party. And I mean that in the most broad sense. We are going to have a blast. And I'm excited. We might even kind of move our furniture around a little bit in our living room so that we have a big, more open space for the 9 of us. I'm going to decorate the tables really beautifully to just really go all out and celebrate. And hopefully we'll sing some Christmas carols. The first Christmas carol actually came about during the Tudor time period. So that's really awesome. And I love Christmas carols and I love singing. And so that's what we're going to be doing on Christmas Eve. And to be honest, my intention is to continue celebrating after the 25th. It's going to be a little tricky for me because I've always been someone who, once Christmas is over and then we have New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, I have always taken down my decorations on New Year's Day because, as I've said, I really like the threshold, that it's a threshold you cross, and you're in this new year, and there you have it. So I can still do that. I can still have that as my threshold of taking the decorations down or what have you, or certainly in terms of my own aims and goals for 2022. But so it's going to test me a little bit. But the idea of going through the 6th, I just feel it's really resonating with me this year. And it's also resonating with me because how when you're trying to get together with friends during the holidays, most everybody has plans prior to the 25th. And so if it doesn't happen before the 25th, you feel like, oh, it's not really real. Well, sure, we can do something after the new year. But then you feel like, well, then we didn't really celebrate during the holiday season. So there's been a couple friends who, I've reached out to, and I've said I have a very good friend who has a new romantic partner, and we haven't met him. Well, we've met him, but we haven't had a proper dinner with the 4 of us together. And I said, hey, how about you guys come over for dinner? And she said, yeah, he's going to be around. He's going to be gone until I think January 1st. And I said, that's not a problem. Our holiday season goes to the 6th. Let's have a holiday dinner after the 1st, before the 6th, and still make it part of our Christmas celebrations. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And I hope I don't know, it may not resonate with any of you at all, but this is what I wanted to share with you. And I want to come back, by the way, to this idea of fasting, because I've been really, writing a lot about this and reading a lot about this around fasting. And it occurred to me, what I think is really interesting is, how all of us who are vegetarian or vegan have heard for years people saying like, oh yeah, I'm vegetarian too, I just eat fish. And so for years we've all kind of been like, why do people think fish are vegetables? And I don't think people really do think fish are vegetables, but in the sense that, for instance, during Advent, and I'll tell you this, during my upbringing in a Catholic Protestant house, give my mom props because she wasn't Catholic. Props meaning that, like, legit, I was raised by both a Catholic and a Protestant. That's a whole different story. My father actually did penance for, 50 years because he married a Protestant and a divorced Protestant at that. So anyway, another story. But the point is, when we were growing up, and we were like in the 1970s, there still was this thing where we didn't have meat on Fridays, but we would have fish. And so that is a tradition that goes back hundreds of years. And so even during Advent in the Tudor times, in the Middle Ages, so you would have fish Fridays. And this is where you start to get people kind of stretching the boundaries and stretching the rules. And I talk about this a little bit in the 30-Day Vegan Challenge, where people are like, well, are penguins fish? No, yes, they're not animals, they're fish, so we can eat them. Like trying to find ways to eat animals. Like, we've been doing this for hundreds of years and we still do it, just making these excuses to eat animals. And so all that's to say is, I think a lot of our thinking today still comes from the idea that fish were allowed, whereas land animals weren't, when we're talking about fasting and periods of fasting. And so I'm going to be doing another episode specifically on that, and kind of how animals have played into, and our consumption of animals have played into this, the thoughts about fasting, and how it's changed over the centuries, and how you can see church doctrine. And I don't just mean in, Christianity, but you can see this in so many different religions, how, like the doctrines would change and the rules would change because people were like, no, don't take my meat away, right? Don't take my animal product. Like, I want to have it. And so they'd be like, okay, fine. Like, you can have, you can have fish, but you can't have, land animals. Okay, fine. You can have chicken. Or, okay, you're supposed to stay, abstain from animal products for 40 days, but let's just do it at least on Fridays. Okay, on Fridays, you don't have to have land animals, but just like how ridiculous we are as human beings. So like, in terms of constantly changing the rules, and like, seriously, people, can like, you just stop eating animals for like a week? Like, let's just try that. So do you see what I mean about even the discipline, right? Even just like saying, like, I'm going to do this thing and I'm just going to make an attempt to be thoughtful and conscious. And that's where I'm at. So, but we'll do another episode specifically on that whole idea of fasting and fish and animals. What do you think about that? I'm always interested in what other episodes you're interested in. I'm so excited because one of the benefits of being home now has been that I've been able to write a lot more podcast episodes, and I hope you've been enjoying them. If you have been enjoying them and getting anything out of them, I really hope you consider becoming a sponsor. $10 a month is all I'm, urging. But of course, there's $20 a month, there's $30, there's $50. We've got folks at much higher levels who have been my angels for years. If they stopped, to be honest, I don't know where I'd be. And so if you are a supporter and you have been supporting for a long time, maybe just go check your Patreon account as well, because credit cards just change all the time. And people don't go and remember all of the places they have their credit cards. They have to go update. And so, the numbers just keep dwindling and they just keep going down and south. And so I'm just urging you to go check your account. If you are a monthly supporter, you can change your support so that it's annual, meaning if you do want to be a $10 a month, or change your monthly subscription, let's say you want to be $20 a month now, or if you want to become a patron for the first time, you can pay that all at once. And the benefit of that is that I receive your patronage right up front, which is of course very helpful for me. And also, what it means, I think there's a little bit of a discount too when you pay it all up front. What also it means is that you don't have to worry about your credit card. And so this idea where I'm telling people and like spending this time like, hey, hi, and you pledged, you said you wanted to support, but like your credit card declined again this year. It's so laborious. It's so hard for me. And as I said, this is pretty much me doing that. And I can spend my time doing that if that's how you think I should spend my time. I don't think that's how I should spend my time, but I do it because I run a business and I take it seriously. But I could really use your support. So thanks for listening. Probably a pretty, this is, I don't know, one of the more personal episodes I've done. And I hope you enjoy it. And I'm thinking of all of you and wishing you all a wonderful, magical, meaningful holiday for the animals. This is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for listening.